Mhm. Hey, Charlie.
Hey,
Um, we are here today to share the story of someone who is very dear to us, my brother Nathan Lamberton. Um, he left us far too soon under some extremely mysterious circumstances that we've all had to wrestle with and live with for going on about 23 years this year. Um, so before we go into the details of what happened to him on, the weekend of May 11th, May 12th, Mother's Day weekend of 2002, uh, first we just want to share a little bit about Nathan and what he meant to us. So Charlie was Nathan's best friend and such a great friend. So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about Nathan?
yeah, there's so much to say. He honestly, he was my best friend. He was my rock. I was going through some tough times towards the end there, and as far as with Nate, and he was there for me through thick and thin. I'll never forget the biggest thing I think of when I think of Nate is when I was in my room, going through some pretty heavy stuff, and I think he just stopped over. It was at my parents', and I just had my door locked in my room. I was crying. I was going through some hell, and he came down and he tried to talk to me, and I wouldn't open the door. I just didn't want to be around anybody. And somehow, some way, he used his Nate charm and just got talking to me, and I finally caved in. I opened the door, and he didn't have to say a word. He just gave me the biggest Nate bear hug, and it's moments like that that yeah, I just miss him so much, and uh he. He was like that to everyone. I mean, he would talk to people that he just met like they had been friends for years, and it was I admired that so much in him. He was such a life giver, such a lover, such a just genuine, good, amazing person. And yeah, he died way too soon, and I'll cherish him. I'll never forget him. He loved kids. He loved everybody. And I just I can't say enough good about him. So
I agree.
yeah.
I was his little sister, am his little sister, and he was always he was always so proud of me, which I thought was so sweet and special, especially looking back, at the ages we were. Typically brothers and sisters didn't necessarily get along in the childhood years, but and we definitely had our sibling stuff, but uh we always had like a lot of love for each other. I remember when we were kids and he would get bullied because he was, I would say he was an empath, and nobody talked about that stuff way back when. But Nathan was very in tune with people's feelings. He felt the full spectrum of emotions. He loved big, and, when he got upset, he did not hold stuff in. He was very, very straightforward in everything. And I think because of how he was, a lot of people really uh, definitely didn't understand him. Definitely boys his age, from, I don't know, 10 to 18 or whatever. Like he just didn't really click with like super manly type of dudes, I guess. And so he was bullied a lot, and that was heartbreaking for me growing up, seeing my brother get bullied. And I remember the month before he died. I came back to visit. I was living out of state at the time, and we just had such a sweet time. We went out to eat. I remember talking about like we had gone through this pretty traumatizing like church experience, and so we had a conversation about that and about our faith, that what our faith looked like, at that time. That was April of 2002. And I just remember the last time I saw him, giving him the biggest hug, and I cried that time. He was about to go see our stepsister down in Missouri, and I just had this feeling like it was the last time I was going to see him. And I think in my mind, I figured, well, he drives a little bit emotionally. So I remember I drove, he left, and then I left, and I was driving behind him, and he was driving a little bit erratically. And so I called him and I was like, and I just lectured him. I was like, you need to drive safely. Like you're worrying me. And, just kind of gave him a little talking to. And that was the last time I saw him. And it was uh, quite the shock to get that phone call. And I think immediately when my mom called me and told me, I was back in Virginia working at a golf course. It was Mother's Day morning, and she called and she said, um, "Nathan's dead. You need to get home as soon as you can." And I of course I just like fell to the ground. I was just in shock, and it didn't even occur to me to think about asking like what happened, because I just assumed that he got in a car accident. And so I finally did ask what happened at some point before I'd even gotten to the airport and everything. And my mom was like, we'll talk about it when you get here. And I was like, talk about it when I get there? That doesn't even make any sense. Like, just tell me that he got in a car accident. Um, so with that, let's kind of go into, because you were the last person to be with him. Um, you guys had been hanging out that night, the
Yeah.
night before. So tell me what y'all did that night, and from your
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's reaching back 20 some years now, but I do remember it fairly well. It was like any other time we hung out in the beginning. We just except we were gonna go see his mom where she was working, and surprise her, and everything seemed fine. I think I don't remember if it was the drive back to my place or at my place where the only thing that started getting me kind of concerned and worried or was something off was going on is he didn't want to go to his house or go back, and he was kind of something was just kind of off. Like he was always very upfront, very, bubbly and his innate personality, but he towards the end, as it was getting near to him leaving, it was just like this feeling of, well, what's going on? And he didn't want to tell me, and usually he's pretty forthcoming with me, and I was like, well, dude, then just spend the night, like it's not a big deal. Like we got the couch or whatever, and you can stay. You're always welcome here. And he's like, oh no, and he just kind of passed it off like, things are gonna be fine, and it wasn't a huge deal, and it was kind of like, okay, because I didn't think, any like certainly nothing like was about to happen, and it was just a trip. I remember, uh, like just saying goodbye. Like my parents were there and said goodbye and drive safe and everything. And I gave him a big hug and he drove off. And I just remember the next day, it was just so surreal. Yeah, because I think looking at that, in fact, I can read from this May 14th thing.
Yeah, go ahead and read that.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, I'll just cut right into it and read it. It says, "Hello, my name is Charlie. Nate and I have been friends for almost a decade. He was my best friend, and we spent a lot of time together. Nate was one of the most kind-hearted, caring, and loving people you'd ever meet. Nate and I spent our last time together on May 11th, 2002. The day seemed like any other day that I spent with Nate, and sometime that evening, Nate and I went to go visit his mom, Nancy, at her work and play pool next door. When we got there, the pool tables were full, so we went to talk to Nancy. Nate and Nancy mostly talked while I listened, and we were all having a decent time. Nate bought his mom a beer for an early Mother's Day present while they talked. Nate and I soon after, or well, I'm reading, sorry. Beer. So Nate and I left soon after to go back to my house. We said goodbye to Nancy and took off. On the way home, I talked to Nate about sleeping over his house, but he did not want to because he told me that he had a weird or strange feeling about his house and did not want to go back there. I asked him what he meant by this weird feeling, and he didn't really say much, but more or less brushed aside the issue like there was something going on, but didn't want to tell me. I finally gave up on the issue and then asked if he wanted to stay over my house. He said, yeah, maybe, and left it at that. We got to my house and Nate only stayed over for about 15, 20 minutes. We talked to my dad a little, a bit before he went to bed. I asked Nate if he wanted to spend the night again, and he was kind of hesitant in his response, but said no. He was just going to go home. I said, okay. And then we said our goodbye. Again, beside Nate's comment of having a weird feeling about his house, everything seemed like a normal time with Nate. Um, let's see. Then the next morning, we got a call from Lori. They had wondered if he knew where Nate
Yeah.
was because he didn't show up for nannying for Christian and Cole. And Christian and Cole was Nate's life. That right there, I knew something was up. I mean, like it's not like a regular job and people just kind of no call, no show. Like Nate loved these kids, and for him to just like not show up, not call, like I knew something was wrong.
Same.
Um, so that struck me as being very odd because those kids were Nate's life, and he would never just forget about them and not show up. It was then we knew something was wrong. After a little while, of not knowing where Nate was, me and my dad went out driving around looking for him. We never found him. Soon after we got back to my house, Nancy called and told us the terrible news. My best friend Nate was dead. To this day, the whole thing seems so surreal to me, and none of it makes any sense. Nothing adds up. I wish I knew more of that, or that I could dig back into my head and remember anything else that might have helped us find some resolution to this. But nothing else stands out. I hope one day we will figure this out and put it to rest so we can all try to find some peace to this matter and just reflect on Nate's loving memory. Um, yeah, it's just such a trip. I remember I was on the deck when I heard the news, and I fell to the floor too, and it's just so unbelievable. Like what? I mean, so out of the blue.
Yeah.
And as we'll get into, I'm sure we're going to explain like just none of it makes any sense. Like the way it was conducted, the case, and just yeah. So I'll let you go from here.
Yeah. Just okay, I'll ask that question in a minute. So, according to your parents and yourself, it sounds like you left your house around 11:30 to 11:45 p.m. Um, no, nobody knows for sure if he made it home or not, or if he went straight to the park or was brought there. Like that part is really uncertain. What we do know is that his bed was not made. The investigators, which I use that term lightly because they sucked, they didn't check to see if his alarm had been set or anything. It was definitely out of character for his bed not to be made. He was extremely anal retentive, if you will,
Yeah,
ish. Like he was very,
OCD about cleaning in particular. Yep.
yeah. So um, he was found by a couple who was on a walk on Mother's Day morning, May 12th at around 10:59 a.m. or something. They saw him hanging from a tree, naked from the waist down, and they called the police. Um, and I'm going to just kind of open up. I have all of the police reports here. I've gone through them a million times, probably, just looking for different things. His body was actually 3.5 to 4 feet above the ground. So suicide was pretty immediately ruled out. The rope was tied to the tree limb, looped around the limb 5 times. The rope was tied in a loop around his neck in a knot that did not slip to tighten. There were some like really small 2 centimeter ish superficial scratches on his ankles, it looked like. Um, He did not have his phone with him. The passenger seat, which you had ridden in just a couple hours before, there was stuff all over his passenger seat. And there were not one, but two cell phones, one of which we all knew was his cell phone. And then the other of which nobody recognizes or has any idea where that cell phone came from. But that I have photographs here with a picture of that cell phone in there. And boy, I guess we'll just kind of jump right into some of these facts. His car was parked in a cul-de-sac, and he was found about a 12-minute walk into the park. The weather that evening was windy, drizzly, and about 41 degrees. You can actually see his clothes were kind of folded, like roughly folded near the base of the deck, and then the tree was on the other side of the deck. And so one of my initial questions is, okay, so did he climb the tree with his clothes on and then somehow tossed his clothes, which neatly fell right next to his sandals, or did he climb the tree half naked and somehow like managed to only get a few superficial scratches near his ankle? That none of that made sense. And so what they were saying, because of the stationary knot and the fact that he was naked from the waist down, was that it was autoerotic asphyxiation. Well, if that was the case, there would be a release mechanism somehow. Your feet would not be 3.5 to 4 feet off the ground, and you might have some lubricant, some sort of pornographic material, something. Um, I, I mean, I'm not a man, but I just can't imagine, setting all that up out in the dark, no flashlight, and leaving your phone in the car and everything else. And um, especially when his apartment or his townhome was empty because his roommate was out of town. Nathan was such a private person. Growing up, he like we had four bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom kind of in the middle. And he would go straight from his bedroom to the bathroom, take a shower, get dressed before you'd ever see him. It was really rare to ever see him before he had showered and gotten ready for the day. And I probably only seen him like with his shirt off a handful of times, like in my life. Like he was pretty private. Um, so we had some questions, like, did you fingerprint the car? No, ma'am. I'm sorry. That's just something you see on TV. That is verbatim what this detective told us. It was back in the day when you could see on the cell phone, you could see who the outgoing calls were made to, but the incoming calls just said incoming call. And you didn't know who that was until you got your cell phone bill. And so we had asked this detective, okay, well, he received a phone call at, I can't remember what time. I think I actually have it back here. But he had received a phone call, and we thought, well, it might be interesting to see who that very last phone call that he received was. And so the detective evidently, we told him contact, AT&T, get this cell phone bill. We can't get it because it's been unpaid. I don't know, somehow for some reason we could not get that last bill. And so a few months later, he was like, I've been trying to get a hold of Nokia to get that cell phone bill, and I can't get it. And I was like, I'm not a detective, but Nokia produces cell phones. They don't provide service, so they wouldn't have the information that you're even looking for. Um, well, we'll get into the rest of this here next, but so let's see what else. So tell him, I mean, was the passenger seat a disaster when you were sitting and riding in the car with him back to your place?
No, and that's the thing. I don't want to jump in and cut you off, but there's just so many things for anyone that knew Nate would be like, what on earth? For any person in general, no
Yeah.
one would go out there and do what it seemed like or what the narrative was. But let alone him, like I don't mean to be funny with this, but like he was for an adult, damn near scared of the dark, let alone
But
to
yeah,
walk out 12 minutes and by himself with no cell phone when the cell phone was connected to his head all the time.
always.
And do that in a stand. I mean, none of it makes sense. There's no way in my mind or anyone can convince me that he just went out after we hung out and decided to do that. That's just absolutely ridiculous. So,
Yeah, if he was found in his closet or something, like I could accept that. I'd be like, okay, well, it is, it is what it is. But
right.
it just like there's so much that does not add up.
So much. Yeah, and he was immaculate with his car. He would get it washed all the time, clean it, detail it, and you telling me that he just had stuff flung all over his seat and is on the floorboards and no, no.
Which is interesting because I'm like, okay, so he dropped you off. He went in, said hi to your parents because he loved your parents loved him, and then he left. There was some talk about like him changing from shoes to sandals. I don't recall exactly what that part was about or if it's even like pertinent.
Yeah, I don't really, I kind of vaguely think something maybe of that, but I don't know exactly either.
And then I guess it's, the like how did all of that stuff get strewn over like in his front seat the way it was after he left you and that stuff was not there? That makes me wonder if he did make it back to his house first and
Yeah. Well,
um,
and then wasn't there like skid marks and stuff? Like almost like it appeared like he stopped abruptly at the cul-de-sac or wherever that was near
yep, there
the
were skid marks.
right.
And there there was some talk about the skid marks possibly being from like one of the police cars that pulled up. I don't know. I think that part is kind of hard to tell, but I will say his parking brake was up.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know if he that's the other question I've always had. I'm like, was he driving his car at the point that it made it into the park?
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
know. But and then again, like I said, this both two those two cell phones were found in
Yeah.
the passenger side.
Yeah. That's weird.
Okay, so let's see here. Let's now give a little bit of background. I think it's time to share the part that makes me the most suspicious about this whole thing, is if that wasn't enough. Um, Somewhere in the early 2000s, Nathan worked at a coffee shop, and he had met this police officer from a neighboring city at this coffee shop and they like became friends. They became friends to the point that Nathan would see this officer patrolling and he would pull up behind him and pull him over and be like, hey man, what's up? And he also, he had this police officer saved in his cell phone with his wife's name. So it was police officer and wife's name, home phone, right? And actually, on his call log, at 8:51 p.m. that night, oh no, it was about he had called his voicemail, was his last dialed call. But he had called this police officer on his home phone somewhere around 5:30 p.m. on May 11th, which is interesting. And so, you know, innocent friendship. Nathan always connected with adults. That wasn't anything all that strange. But what was strange was that he had started to do alcohol compliance checks for this police officer and the Orono Police Department. And from there, well, he told my dad about that he was doing that. So he had told my dad that, he was doing this undercover alcohol thing with Orno. And my dad was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, these are people's livelihoods and businesses. This is not smart. Don't do this. And I guess Nathan made some comment about needing the money. And in my notes, I have references to a W-2, but I do not have that. I have not found the W-2. I don't know where it is, but I referenced a W-2. Um, and after he had been found and we had started to really like try and dig into this, we had a church friend who was chief of police of a neighboring police department to Orno. And this officer, this retired police chief, looked into it for us, and he actually spoke with the officer that Nathan was directly involved with at Orono, and this individual told um, the former chief of police that Nathan was an informant for Orono Police Department, and didn't elaborate on details or anything. And at a certain point, as he was asking questions, the police officer Nathan was friends with said that he no longer feels comfortable talking about the situation. So he did directly tell this other police officer that he was an informant for Orno. Um, let's see. Oh, I also just randomly looked down in my binder here. Um, we were when we were going through all this trying to figure out what had happened, we evidently we were trying to just kind of trying to figure out, like, was Nate into some freaky shit, or you know what I mean? Like, we were trying to be honest with ourselves. We just genuinely wanted to know what happened. And I have this note here that Nathan had told this officer that he was friends with that he had actually refused an X-rated video from a, a friend of his. And so all that to say, like, they had a relationship, right? They were not just like casual acquaintances. Like, he pulled this guy over. I have this memory of him telling me about going to like dinner at their house, but had his home phone number, everything. And so to take this a step further here, um, Nathan never told my mom. He didn't tell me, um, anyone really but my dad, that he was even working with, or he didn't tell you, right?
I only knew, in fact, that he did tell me that he was, I thought it was like a volunteer kind of a thing. Like he was friends with Kurt and he's just like, yeah, I'll help you out once or twice or something. That's kind of the gist of what I got out of it.
Okay. Well, I
Mm.
think that's how it started, but I
Mm.
don't think that's how it ended. So now
Yeah.
I'm going to read an email that I received after Nathan had died. This is from a family friend, and this is just describing an encounter that he had with Nathan shortly before his death. Emily. Nathan knew me through Maria and Diane and occasionally would come to our house when he was in the neighborhood. He was very friendly towards everyone, especially other little kids. Whenever he had a new project to work on or a job, he was always anxious to talk about it. Prior to this conversation, I remember he was all excited about some car he was going to try and get so that he could fix it up. He seemed really excited about the engine carburetor or something like that. He was pretty meticulous about the stuff he was interested in. The reason I mention this is that this is the sort of response that you would get from Nate if you asked him a question. Many other young people wouldn't have had much of a response if you asked them how they were doing or what they were working on. This was not the case with Nate. He always liked to talk to adults about everything. One morning, or one afternoon, I was paying for gas at PDQ on 3 Points and Mound, and Nate was in the store at the same time. He said hi, and I casually asked him how he was doing. Instead of just saying okay or something, he seemed pretty excited and said something to the effect of, "Not so good, because I know some stuff about some people, and I don't know whether I should tell anyone about it because these people don't want me to talk about it." Further, he said, if I talk about it, I could be in big trouble for telling on them. At the time, he didn't seem scared, but he was definitely excited about the whole thing. I don't recall what my response was, but I didn't get too excited because I figured it was a conversation similar to car conversations and other stuff previously. It didn't occur to me that there might be something more serious going on, and I believe I told him that he'd probably make a good decision or something like that, and I'd see him later. At that point, I left and I didn't see him again. Then, not very long after that conversation, Maria, which I believe was her husband, um, or his wife, got a phone call and said that she had some bad news about Nate. He was dead, and the sheriff was investigating the circumstance, but it looked like it was a suicide. As soon as she said that, I replied that I had just recently had a conversation with Nate, and why would anyone who knew Nate think that it would could have possibly been a suicide? He was never in a state of mind that was anywhere close to suicide. It just wasn't him. My conversation with him suddenly seemed incredibly important now. I asked Maria if the police or sheriff would be interested in knowing what Nate had told me, but I believe the response was that they had already ruled the whole thing as some crazy, unbelievable suicide story, and it was pretty much a done deal. The reason I was so taken by that news was that he had said the things he had said only days or maybe weeks before this all happened, and it seemed like critical information. He was really in the middle of something and struggling to know what to do. But there was apparently no further investigation done by the sheriffs, or they said the Mountain Police, which is irrelevant, but and it was like law enforcement had shut the whole thing down. That's why I suggested that someone should contact the Attorney General's office. But it sounds like everyone has just stonewalled you, and this is obviously a very painful endeavor to pursue. I understand that this sort of investigation, if law enforcement refuses to do their job, can be very expensive to pursue with private investigators. Hopefully, you can make some headway on this. And if I can be of any assistance, I'll talk to anyone you wish. We all like Nate a lot. He was genuinely a good kid. We'll all do what we can. So that story actually did become very, important and a piece of the puzzle. Another thing is that night after he left your house, um, he had he had made a phone call to um, my dad asking if he could stay at my dad's house that night. And it looks like that call with my dad was around 6:30 p.m. But he had asked my dad at that time if he could come stay the night. And um, unfortunately, his uh, ex-wife at the time had said, unless he shares like what's going on, that he can't stay the night. Um, so, with all those with all of this background story of the informant stuff and everything else, like makes you wonder, right?
Mhm.
Did you go to Target with Nathan that day, or did he come get you after he went to Target?
I think that must have been after, because I don't remember going to Target.
After, yeah, I have the receipt for that because it had all, he had Mother's Day cards in the car. He had
Mhm.
plans the next day. There was
Mhm.
no, there was no uh,
Well,
reason to be suicidal.
yeah, and that's just another oddity is like, he loved his mom. His mom loved him, and sure, like there were issues here and there, like with any other parent, and but to do that to her on Mother's Day too is just no way. There's just no way.
And
And
why on earth would you do it in such a way that's
oh,
humiliating to you? And
right,
you're like just not that. I don't know.
right, yeah,
Okay. Oh, one other thing that I feel is very important. So, when this initially happened, we were just in such shock. And the pain was like, when someone dies like that, and it's like that it took, you know, it's like you got to get over the initial shock and all these things before you can even think straight, right?
yeah, yeah,
And I think that one thing that's been weighing on me for a long time is because of the some of the things that were said at his funeral. People got the impression that he did commit suicide. And, I certainly don't blame the minister, which was my uncle. Love him, but he didn't, no, none of us knew, right? So um I just, it's important to me that people actually hear the story of what happened and what like these facts are. We have both talked at length about, um, things beyond fact, speculation, I guess is the word, and so forth. But we'll leave that, we'll leave the speculation aside for today and just kind of share facts. And but one super important fact that also has led us to believe that there was foul play involved was that my mom on December 6th of 2002 received a phone call from, we don't know who, but they said if you don't back off investigating, that your girls are next. And we have two witnesses to that phone call. Um, and, you know, oh, there's just so much. It's just there's nothing that adds up. And I earlier this year, I really spent a lot of time digging through everything, looking through all the pictures, with the exception of the pictures that actually had Nathan in them, and reading through, the autopsy report. And um, I noticed a few really interesting things. One of which was a note from, I don't know exactly where this is in my notes, but there was a note from some organization that had received the actual rope and cord, and they said it appeared as though the rope had been laundered before they received it. Which, what? That doesn't even make sense. Why would the Harper County like launder the rope before they sent it off to, I believe it was like a state, just another organization who looked at the case. And yeah, um, I don't know.
It's just so,
So
the whole thing's just so bizarre.
yeah, it is. It is so bizarre. I mean, there's other little like random type of bizarre things in there too. Like my cousin at one point was dating this girl who worked at a movie theater with this guy who lived across the street from Nathan and I growing up. And she was telling this guy about the situation with Nathan. And this guy was like, "Oh yeah, I knew Nate and I knew who was after him and everything else." Like, so we've heard people kind of confirm that his life was endangered and that they knew about it. But so far, unfortunately, nobody has had the courage to come forward and share what they know. But I hope that, at least that maybe sharing this story, maybe it will move someone to actually share what they know or what they heard that might be useful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for Nate to have, just some kind of conclusion as to what any kind of help would be greatly appreciated from anyone, because it just, again, none of it makes any sense, and there's just too many holes in the story. And yeah,
Yes. Um, yeah, it's right now the death is actually listed still on the death certificate. It says undetermined. Um, you know, Unfortunately, even if we were to be able to say, "Hey, look, we've kind of figured out what happened," like there's no evidence of anything remaining that I'm aware of that would even be helpful. And honestly, like I think to my family at this point, you know, I think we just want to know like the truth of what happened and just be able to take it off the heart. And I think there would be a measure of like closure and healing that would happen from just knowing the truth, because it's extremely mentally and emotionally challenging to lose anyone, right? Like even like in the natural, like a natural death is excruciating. But something like this with all of the added like mystery and weirdness and stuff, it's something, quite something to live with.
yeah. It just, it just, well, my best friend, your brother, just got yanked away, like with no warning, no anything. And so, and then again, yeah, on top of all that, with everything that happened that doesn't make sense, it just makes it very confusing and hard for everybody that was close to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that you can think of?
Um, no, I wish there was. There's so many things that just don't add up. I rack my brain, and I still think about it from time to time as far as if there's anything that I could have missed, or, I don't even get into the, God, if I could have just got him to spend the night that night or whatever, but, I try to leave those feelings aside. It's just, yeah, it's a trip. I still can't believe it. I don't think I ever will. Yeah, I love him. I miss him, and I'll see him again. But when you get like the times where you just feel there's sense like he's around or he's watching, or like the miraculous times we've had, even and just like texting it, just like it's just so when we're thinking about it or whatever, and just the serendipities and things. So I know he's out there.
Yeah, I agree. I find a lot of comfort um, in just knowing that he's, still exists, and at some point we'll all be more fully aware of one another's continued existence, and that's such a beautiful and hopeful thing. And um, yeah, uh, oh, there's so much, but I think that I think that we can probably leave it at that. I don't have anything else jumping out at me as far as like pertinent things. I think that the main things that really made us feel like there was foul play involved were, the fact that he was working as an informant, and having an unidentified phone in the car, which never got returned back to us. We got all the other, we got his other phone and all the other things, but that white phone, that white Nokia, was never returned. Um, the threatening phone call was
Yeah,
another one. Um,
the circumstances of
the circumstances that just don't add up, like, and yeah, so oh, it it feels good to finally share some of this. I think for a long time, we there really was a lot of fear. Like, I moved out of state because I didn't feel good living in Minnesota at all after I moved back after he had died. And but you know what? Like, we can't live we can't just be ruled by fear. You can The truth will set you free. And I think that hopefully that we all do find like some freedom in the fact that the truth of like these facts are out there. And who knows, maybe we'll get some new information and we'll be able to do another conversation and share some more truth.
yeah, yeah. We'll figure it out one way or another sometime in this life or the next.
Absolutely.
Yeah.